According to new data from the CDC, 86% of children in America ages 5 through 17 have antibodies from past COVID infections. What does this mean for the future of our children for COVID? Does this mean they can't get it anymore? Let's talk about it. So according to this new data, almost 9 in 10 children in America have had COVID already. Now, this is data that was recently released going up until August of 2022, which means they probably have even higher numbers by now. But this is comparison to data from this past February that showed that at that point, that there were 75% of children had these antibodies, which means about 11% of more children have developed COVID or has been infected compared to before. Now, what does this mean and why is this so important? Well, what they were checking for were the anti-nucleocapsid antibodies or anti-N antibodies. These are antibodies that can only appear from a past infection. The vaccine does not bring this particular antibody. It brings other antibodies called the anti-spike antibody, which can happen from the vaccine or from the wild disease, but they were specifically looking at the anti-N antibodies. So what does this mean in terms of future infections for COVID for our children? Now, a lot of experts are concerned and expressing concerns about how we know that these antibodies don't necessarily mean that they are going to be protected from catching the disease. And of course, there's the potential concern of passing it if they are a high-risk child themselves for some disease that they may have, or if they pass it along to somebody else, that they still could create havoc for that person or a loved one in their family. However, it's also so well understood right now that the overwhelming majority of children who catch COVID, that it's something that's very mild. And so then the question starts becoming, where are we at in terms of risk versus benefit if we were to do a vaccine or if a person were to be infected again? Now, although children can get COVID multiple times, as can adults, every time that you get an infection, you have more antibodies, you stimulate the immune system, you stimulate the memory cells, the white blood cells, in order to give you more protection, that in almost every case, the likelihood is that if a person had another infection, it should be more mild than previously. Now, that hasn't happened for everybody. I do know some people who did have a worse go of it when they had Omicron compared to previous Deltas and Alphas, original strains. And that's unusual, but it is not unprecedented. That can happen. Now, it is also important to understand that although usually very mild, COVID, we know, can occasionally cause rare, very serious problems with some kids, especially those at high risk. But we also know that there are some kids who can go on into long COVID, which is where people have symptoms related to the virus well past the time that they were infected. There's absolutely no data, however, that looks to see if a person's more likely to get long COVID after a reinfection as opposed to their first infection. But according to the CDC, during the first 3 months of Omicron, which would have been December of 2021 through February of 2022, there were approximately 400 children in America in this age group. Actually, this is in 5 to 11, this particular data, who were hospitalized due to COVID. Not because they had a co-infection and they went for something else, but this is because of COVID. Now, 30% of those children had no pre-existing condition. 20% of them did have to go to the ICU, and they did point out that 9 out of 10 children who that happened to being hospitalized were not vaccinated. But I do want to put this into perspective because I think that's the thing that's been missing here. There are approximately 25 million children in America age 5 to 11. So if 400 kids were hospitalized during and admitted due to SARS-CoV-2 during those first few months of Omicron, that means 0.0016 of American children were hospitalized during that time period during COVID, which is, of course, is a very, very low number. So what is my take on this? Okay, so most children have had COVID already. That's great. That means that they're much less likely to get sick. And of course, if they don't get sick, they can't pass it along to others, although it is not impossible. But the fact that they have these antibodies, that's the primary thing that our body needs in order for our long-term protection. Now, we do know that COVID doesn't guarantee protect, that a child won't catch it again. But then again, we now know very well that that's true for vaccines as well. Vaccines do not stop you from catching it. Now, in terms of the new booster that is Omicron specific, the issue here is, although there is the research now that they are in humans are showing that the antibodies are going up for these, there is still no data that actually shows that it protects against a person catching it, getting sick from it, or passing along to others. Now, more data will come out of it in the next few months, but as of now, when people are trying to weigh their risk versus benefit, when in terms of the vaccines, in terms of what happens if they get exposed, there's still a large gap of information that we just don't know. That time will tell. So anyways, I hope that taught you a thing or two. As always, please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already. Please join us on our Patreon account. We can create an account for you where you can get exclusive information. And of course, we just recently launched our podcast where you can catch this information in audio format. Thanks, and have a great day. Please make sure that you subscribe to our channel. We release new content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday.